Hello Year 10, I hope you're well. Welcome to your next feedback session. As usual, this is feedback based on the work that you completed in the past few lessons. In this session, I'm focusing on the work you completed between last Monday and Wednesday, ending with that quiz that you completed on the Wednesday. So this is between the 22nd and the 24th of February. First things first, I'd like to celebrate a couple of things. First of all, the class average on this quiz was 85%, which is absolutely fantastic. We like to see average scores of over 80% because that shows that we have mastery in the subject. It shows that your understanding is really thorough of the topic at hand. So the fact that we've averaged out at that score as a class is absolutely brilliant. So well done to all of you. And 15 out of 19 of you completed the quiz. If you're somebody who didn't do it last week, you might want to go back and do it now, at the very least to so that you're aware of what you do and don't know and what you might need to revisit. But on the whole, I'm very happy with the number of people who completed this quiz. So well done to all of you. And I also wanted to point out what questions we did best in. So you'll see these are 4 questions on the screen here, and nobody got these ones wrong. Everybody got these questions right, which is fantastic. So everybody was able to recognise how Romanticism considers nature, what the definition of sublime is. You were all able to comment on what the repetition of the word huge to describe the mountain suggests about the narrator's view of it. And you were all also able to identify what message Wordsworth was trying to convey in the poem. All right, it's absolutely spot on. Right? This is really key knowledge. Moving forward with this poetry part of your GCSE. So yes, I'm just really, you should be very proud of yourselves with the hard work that you've put in and what you've been able to achieve. So well done all round. What this quiz also flagged to me though was just a few questions that we do need to briefly revisit and just relook at. And these will be questions that we didn't get 80% as an average on. And what that tells me is it's just something to revisit, something to remind everybody of, all right, just so that we can all be sure that we have the correct knowledge moving forward for when we come to a situation where it needs to be applied. So I'm going to start with this information here. We're just going to briefly go back to look at what Romanticism is, okay? So Romanticism, also known as the Romantic era, okay, was an artistic, literary, musical and intellectual movement that originated in Europe towards the end of the 18th century. And in most areas it was at its peak in the approximate period from 1800 to 1850. The Romantic era was partly a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, we've talked about the Industrial Revolution before. We've looked at A Christmas Carol and the effect that it had on society and the people living within it. Also the aristocratic social and political norms of the Age of Enlightenment and the scientific rationalisation of nature. So before the Romantic era, you had what was called the Age of Enlightenment. And this is where the focus was primarily on sort of science and rationale and logic and facts and, finding things out for what they are. Which then sort of spurred on the Romantic movement, which was kind of a rejection against that. It was going back to the ideas surrounding emotions and individual experience and nature, things like that. And it was also, as I said, a reaction against the Industrial Revolution. A large portion of the countryside land would have been torn down and destroyed to make way for these factories, to make way for these cities to take place. And that's something that the Romantics fought against or very heavily disagreed with. As I said there, the Industrial Revolution involved industry becoming more popular, with people moving from small towns to large cities, and large portions of nature were destroyed to make room for factories. Okay, and we just need to bear that information in mind because, as I said, there was one question which was, what is Romanticism? I see the majority of people got it correct, but a few people got them wrong, which is why, again, we're revisiting it. And the same with this one here. What was Romanticism a reaction to? It was the Industrial Revolution, the social and political norms of the Enlightenment, and the scientific rationalisation of nature. Again, same situation, the majority got it correct. But a few people didn't, hence why we're bringing it up again here. Just to help us identify what information to look at next. So here are another couple of questions where, although the majority did do well, you can see that a couple of people perhaps didn't quite get the right answer. So we are just going to go through this information, okay? So what is the form of extract from the Prelude we need to consider, and what effect does the combination of blank verse and iambic pentameter have in the poem? And I'm going to go through that information again now. So remember, the form of extract from the Prelude is that it is an epic poem written in blank verse. So remember, an epic poem is a poem that's usually written about dramatic tales or war stories. Okay, as I've got on the screen here, it is an epic poem written in blank verse. Usually epic poems are used to tell dramatic tales about war and heroes. However, in this poem, the form is being used to describe ordinary events, okay? If I could quickly move to the next slide. Remember, an epic poem is a long narrative poem that is usually about heroic deeds and events that are significant to the culture of the poet. Now, obviously the key to remember with extract from the Prelude is it is just an extract. This is a very small section of what is an incredibly large poem, an incredibly large piece of work that spans over 10 books, okay? So it does classify as an epic poem. Or you can think about epic poems by literally looking at the word epic. Epic means sort of brilliant, fantastic, amazing. And that links to this form. And as I talked about before, it's a form that people, many ancient writers used to tell tales of dramatic events involving war and heroes. But one thing that we know about the Prelude is that this form was being used to describe ordinary events. And this links into kind of that romantic ideology that nature had power. Wordsworth is taking this quite ordinary situation of a person coming out to the lake and spotting a mountain and making it, comparing it kind of to these really dramatic events and heroes and wars. And by giving it that dramatic element, it's helping the reader to understand just how powerful nature is and just how much we should be thinking about nature and how much we should be appreciating it, especially at the time when this was written, when nature was being destroyed for the sake of industry. So like I've said there, this helps to reinforce how dramatic the event is for the speaker, reflecting the power that nature is having over him as well. It reinforces that the speaker is having a sublime experience as he finds himself in awe of the mountain. And just to clarify, the writing of the poem in blank verse, okay, so blank verse is poetry that doesn't have a particular rhyme scheme, but it is generally written in iambic pentameter. And we've talked about iambic pentameter before. And what that phrase means is, so if the meter is iambic, that means it contains iambs, and one iamb contains an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable, so da-dum. And pentameter, if we break that down, so penta, it's 5 meters. So that means there's 5 iambs in the meter if you take that phrase as a whole. Okay, it's important to know how to break that down because in the future we'll also look at iambic tetrameter and other variations of it. But these two things combined, blank verse and iambic pentameter, it mirrors regular speech. Do we all automatically work with or speak with 5 iambs in every line that we speak? No, but it's meant to represent that natural sort of up and down and stressing and unstressing of syllables that take place in everyday speech. Okay? And what this does is it highlights how this is an individual's experience that is being described in this situation. Wordsworth's almost telling you a story in this situation. He's wanting to relate his experience to a reader in the hope that he will help the reader to understand just how powerful nature can be, and so that they can always kind of see it through his eyes. Yeah, we talked about that. What is a Volta is the next thing to revisit. Once again, another situation where the majority got it correct, but a few didn't, so again we are just going to revisit it briefly. It's important to remember that the Volta is a turn in thought or argument in poetry. Okay, it's not a turn or change in the poetic form, the form doesn't change, or a turn or change in the structure of the poem, no. It's a turn or change in the thought or argument. It's a turn or a change in almost the theme or the tone or the topic being discussed within the poem. It's almost like the narrator does a complete U-turn on what they've been saying already. You could have a poem where the first half is very positive, the second half becomes quite negative, vice versa. You could have a poet who thinks a particular thing in the first half or in the first part of the poem and then completely changes their mind about it in the second half. And this is this Volta. And I say it's a device that usually features in sonnets, but it can appear elsewhere as well. And obviously when it comes to the Prelude, it features about halfway through the poem when you get that word when, all right, which is accompanied by the caesura, which really makes that word stand out. It makes the reader pay attention because all of a sudden, after he'd been using his boat after it went heaving through the water like a swan, all of a sudden we have when from behind that craggy steep, and that's when we have that shift that we've talked about before. This is the turning point in the poem where the poet reveals the huge mountain beyond the craggy steep. And this is the climax of the poem. The poet is realising there is more to the scene than he thought, more beyond the original end point, okay? And this also acts as a metaphor representing how man's ideas about the world are wrong and limited, reiterating the power of nature. If you remember back to the lessons that we looked at about this poem, in the first half, it's man who has the power, who is in control, who is confident. Okay, and then we have that Volta happen and that mountain appears, and all of a sudden all of those qualities shift over to the mountain. Okay, the mountain is the thing that becomes powerful, is in control, is confident in the situation. The mountain is personified and given those qualities that man had originally, and man is left in fear and runs away from it. Okay, and again it's all meant to do with how nature is more powerful perhaps than we think, and that we should respect it more. All right, but The Volta is a really important structural point to make note of and to be able to discuss. So again, always worth bringing back up. The next question we need to consider, what effect does Wordsworth's use of enjambment have on the reader? Remember, enjambment is where there's no end-stop punctuation at the end of a line, and you tend to have several lines that run over into each other. Again, another situation where many people got it right, and a few people didn't, so again, it's worth revisiting just to secure that knowledge in your mind. So enjambment features a good few times in the poem. You can see right at the beginning here, you've got a couple of lines with no end-stop punctuation, so moving all the way through. It does feature regularly. And Wordsworth's use of enjambment contributes to the overwhelming nature of the poem, as the reader is forced to move from line to line, each of which contains more information. But it also illustrates how eager the speaker is to share their experience with the reader. With there not being any regular pauses at the end of these sentences, it's causing you to read on and on and on, and it just it keeps going. Of course, there are punctuation at times, but for the whole, where it does feature so regularly, again, the purpose is meant to be because it just makes you keep reading. The poem is meant to become a bit overwhelming, again, to reflect the overwhelming effect that nature is having on the speaker, on the narrator, and they've moved from nature. But again, it's just to convey the overall overwhelming nature of the experience itself. Okay, the narrator here was overwhelmed by nature. All right, the power of nature won over the power of man. Okay, and he was overwhelmed, and he did recede away from nature. And they'd say that this is where the structure is really helping to back that up. So again, another really important structural element to be aware of, to discuss if the situation requires it. Okay. That is all for this feedback session. Well done for all your hard work. The quiz scores are definitely reflecting your engagement with the content, which is absolutely fantastic. I appreciate it's a lot of content with poetry, but before you know it, you'll all be poetry experts. All right, trust me. I know we've got a lot of poems to get through, and having to get used to what all the different things mean. But I can see again from the work that you're completing that we are getting there. So you should be really, really proud of all the work that you have achieved. As ever, please always get in touch if I can ever help with anything, all right? Whether you've just got a question about the poetry, or if you need me to clarify anything, or anything like that, you can either leave me a comment on Show My Homework, or send me an email via your college email address. But otherwise, that is it from me for this week. So I say well done with all your hard work, all right? And I'll see you again in our next feedback video. Take care.